What's going on? Good to see you, Internet. So here's the thing. It's time for a bit of a heart-to-heart about the state of the Linux world here at the end of 2020. And I guess I want to frame this video by saying that in no uncertain terms, this is going to be a little bit of a puff piece, I guess, for Ubuntu. And if you're not on board for that, that's fine. You can go watch something else. But I just want to, I guess, share with you my experience of using the Linux desktop now for basically 10 years. This channel has been around for 10 years now, which is a bit scary. And there's been a lot of distributions come and go. And also, there are more than ever amazing Linux distributions to choose from. Doesn't matter what your preference is, whether you're an Arch-based person, Fedora, Ubuntu, Debian, there is just a myriad of quality open source operating systems to choose from nowadays. And so today's video is just going to be sharing why I love Ubuntu and some of the reasons thereof. So let's jump into it and we'll see how much progress we can celebrate over the last 10 years or so. Okay, so I realize that there are a lot of different Linux distros out there and a lot of great reasons to hate Ubuntu, being a very strong word. Now, I personally have also disagreed with some of the decisions that that Canonical has made regarding the Ubuntu desktop over the last 10 years or so. However, here's what I keep coming back to, and this is really hard to argue with. For me personally, I have never been more productive and worked better than I have on the Ubuntu desktop. This includes Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows 8, Mac OS in the billions of versions that have been since, or in the last 10 years, includes the transition from GNOME 2 to Unity and back to GNOME 3. Something about the way that the Ubuntu desktop is put together just clicks with me for some reason. And as I've gotten older and have had less and less time to tinker and tweak and change Linux distros to suit the way that I work, I really appreciate the distros that can just churn out a release cycle after release cycle, and give us quality. Now, here's where the road got a little bit rough for me. So, quick history lesson. Back when I first started using Linux, my first foray into Linux was with Linux Mint. Linux Mint then evolved to trying out OpenSUSE and a few of the other distributions that were around at the time, including a brief foray into KDE4 with Mandriva and PC Linux OS. But before long, I found myself back with GNOME 2 right as the switch was being made to Unity. Now, the first release that I remember blowing my mind a little bit in terms of polish and in terms of how just productive I felt on a Linux desktop was Ubuntu 10.04. There was something about the theming of that distribution. There was something about the way that it was trying to make a big splash in the world of operating systems. It also launched the Ubuntu One cloud syncing service. Look, I was such a fan of Ubuntu in this era that I made a fake commercial as an 18-year-old that was just in love with the concept. I'll put a link to it. It's pretty cringy now, but I really, really loved this project. And then we had Unity. And Unity was a big pill to swallow, but it was an easier pill to swallow, in my opinion anyway, than the default GNOME 3 that we were seeing on Fedora and other distributions of the like, around 2011 or so. Then in 2012, we had the Precise Pangolin, which was Ubuntu 12.04. Now, this was the release that saw me hit my peak in terms of productivity on the Linux desktop, in terms of output of the amount of videos that I was doing. I was studying at the time, so I was working pretty hard in general. But that Ubuntu 12.04, screen's fading out here, 12.04 was the first release where I went, you know what? Ubuntu's got something special here with the Unity desktop. And anybody who's been around that long will probably have something that they appreciated about Ubuntu Unity. I still pine for the heads-up display menu that allowed you to tap the Alt key on the keyboard and start typing, and it would select, it would search and give you the result from the different drop-down menus of whatever app you had open. So if you needed to find macros in LibreOffice, hit that little button, start typing Mac, and it would come up with the menu entry for macro. Mind-blowing stuff at the time. So this is where also the relationship after this point started to get a bit rocky, in that Ubuntu was trying to find ways of monetizing their desktop. They had this project that they wanted to push forward, and at this point cloud computing wasn't as big of a business as what it is today. And the desktop was seen primarily as the push, as the focus for Canonical. So they attempted to do some affiliate deals with Amazon by including some search results in the Dash, which was like the application launcher at the time. And they also had affiliate links for the Amazon store itself, as well as they had the Ubuntu One cloud syncing service and a few other things that you could pay for to use. Now, unfortunately, many of these things were not only not used in the case of Ubuntu One, and they ended up sunsetting that a few years down the track, but there were very big concerns about privacy and all these sorts of things tied up with the Amazon affiliate links. And this is where Ubuntu really started to fall out with some of its community. Now, for me personally, I didn't have a problem just installing it, removing the stuff that I didn't want, like the Amazon lenses and the affiliate link in the Unity launcher, and just carry on with my day, no questions asked. And while there were some who were still a bit sore about the whole Unity desktop transition from GNOME 2, we also started to see the Mate project emerge as a viable successor or continuation of GNOME 2. And so there was a refuge for those people as well. Also, around this time, around 2013 or so, Linux Mint started to develop their own Cinnamon desktop. And while I was curious about what Cinnamon was doing, I could not argue with how productive I was on Ubuntu. So this leads us to the LTS release 14.04, the trusty tar. For me, this Ubuntu release cemented my love for Ubuntu as an operating system and as a desktop to use. Again, one of my best reviews, in my humble opinion, went to Ubuntu 14.04 that year. I felt like they had really hit their stride, that Unity desktop was ready to go mainstream. All of the initial bugs and quirks had been ironed out, and this was a really polished, coherent, well-designed, well-thought-out shell, a really great place to get work done. And that was what I ran on my desktop for like 2 straight years. And it was kind of saw the end of my distro hopping era as somebody in the early 20s. And then as time went on, I would of course bounce around to different distros as this channel evolved. And some 350 something or 60 something videos later, here we are running once again Ubuntu. Now, that's not to say that there are plenty of distributions that I love, love, love. There are so many great quality Linux distros out there now. Like I said at the top of the video, Pop! OS is amazing, doing amazing stuff right now. Elementary OS, very dear to my heart, and I will be booting it up as soon as Elementary OS 6 pops out from development. Linux Mint is doing its own thing, and I love what the Linux Mint team do. Zorin OS is a great place for newbies to start. I mean, heck, Farron OS that I just looked at is another amazing place to start that brings KDE to the masses. But here's the thing though. Arguably, none of those projects would exist if it weren't for the hard work and dedication of the team at Canonical who made Ubuntu possible. Yes, Linux Mint possibly might have their own Debian edition that they can spin off and choose to run solo for a little while, and they could very easily do that. But you could argue that very few of these other projects would exist were it not for the mainstream appeal that the Ubuntu desktop brought about. I'm a product of that era in that I came up when Ubuntu was coming up, and it's been really hard to shake ever since. And there's just something about, and nowadays the reasons that I choose to run it over most things, it's something about the way that they're theming, something about it, the colors pop, the contrast is spot on, the font rendering is amazing. I can look at this desktop all day and not get fatigued, which for some reason happens on a lot of distros. These are very, very small things. These are not surface level decisions that you can just solve with a quick skin or whatever. These are really well thought out design decisions. And Elementary OS is another great example of a really well designed desktop. But because of the fact that I've been running the Elementary 5.1 as opposed to the new the new version that's in development, I feel like it's starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. But the theming and the overall presentation of the Ubuntu desktop now, as it stands in Ubuntu 20.10, is really tight, and I love it. Not only that, the performance of GNOME Shell is now completely on par with the fastest desktops out there on my hardware. Now, I've got a pretty decent Dell XPS 15 from a year or two ago, and it flies. Like the BTRFS file system and 20 gig of RAM and an NVIDIA blah blah blah, it's got room to spare. And no matter how much stuff I open on this thing, it just flies. And that was not always the case with the GNOME desktop-based Ubuntu distros. So this is to tell a long story short. Now, look, I realize that one of the biggest controversies around the Ubuntu desktop nowadays is snap packages. And while I completely appreciate the fact that people want to see the whole process open source from store to server to backend, all of those things, I get that. At the same time, I really love and appreciate what snap packages bring to the table. Because while Flatpak is great, their updates are huge, and their updates come out and then we get platform updates and then they just go on and on. So Flatpaks are great, but the performance benefits of Flatpaks and snaps are negligible now, in my opinion, especially past first launch. App images are great, but very decentralized. I've got a whole nother video that talks about the differences between these three universal package systems. Go check that out if you want. But for me, I freaking love the ability to just jump into the terminal and say snap install whatever. And considering that my work as a full-time teacher is very reliant on the Microsoft ecosystem, the ability to get things like Microsoft Teams, which we rely on, and other bits and pieces from the Snap Store, super simple, super quick and easy, is a huge plus. Time is limited nowadays, and I don't have time to be stuffing around looking for ways to compile different things and whatever. So snaps are a massive convenience boost for me. Honestly, it's like it's pain-free compared to Mac OS and Windows and all of those things. I get the latest open source software delivered right to my desktop with minimal update sizes, and it's just mwah, it's butter. It's what I would have dreamed of 10 years ago when we were starting this thing out. Anyway, now I realize that there are a lot of things that we could complain about in the open source world. But honestly, as I look back over the 10 years that I have used the Linux desktop, and just the amount of sheer passion and joy and productivity and tinkering and all of that good stuff that's come from it, I honestly think we've come a long, long way in 10 years. And the stuff that we're seeing happen now on the desktop space is just so exciting compared to what it was 10 years ago. When arguably Ubuntu was one of the only usable mainstream consumer-facing Linux distributions out there. I think we've got a lot to be grateful for. And like I said, there are so many great distros out there. I'm not saying that you should go and run Ubuntu because it's objectively the best one out there. It's not. But for me, for my use, and for what I appreciate doing, there's something about it that keeps bringing me back. And every time I do, I am not faced with many regrets. What I will say is that the situation for me personally became a real tipping point with the GNOME-based releases on Ubuntu 20.04. Up to that point in time, there were always things that I didn't really like about it, and performance was a bit sluggish. But since 20.04, since towards the beginning of this year, it's been amazing, and I've really loved my time using it. But I think it is fair to say the Linux desktop landscape would not be the same were it not for the work that Ubuntu has done. And ladies and gents, that's why I freaking love Ubuntu. So get out there, choose the Linux distro that you love, and show it some support this holiday season. Get in there and just let the developers know how much you appreciate the work that they do. Because I think while we can all nitpick and complain as much as we like, at the end of the day, we're getting a pretty freaking awesome product for free. Interpret that in as many ways as you want. Well, thanks so much for watching, ladies and gents. Let me know, what was the thing that started you off on your Linux journey in the comments below. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Here's to 10 years. Clink. Bye.